we said, how can we bring science to this pilot project? How can we use smoke weather, because there's certain weather conditions that are more ideal to burn under than others? How can we use that to our advantage? And so we came up with basing everything pretty much on the transport wind. So the transport wind, if you're not familiar with it, that's what moves the smoke. It's just not what you're feeling at the surface. If you've ever been out and you see smoke plumes, you kind of see they go up and sometimes they stop and then they flatten out and go along. That's like the top of the mixing layer. So that's where all your convection's going. That's where the smoke in the air is mixing. And so that transport wind is the wind from the surface all the way up to that layer. And that's what's moving your smoke. So we said, okay, if you've got a transport wind, for example, this is coming out of the southwest. So any of these areas that are burning to the southwest of Albany, which is the largest city in this region, that smoke is going to pass over that city. So how can we keep as much smoke from entering that airshed as possible? And we came up with this flow chart right here. So if you are within this cone, which is 30 degrees on either side of the transport wind vector, and you want to get a permit to burn, you're going to have some more regulations to go through. So if your transport winds are low, or you're something else called smoke dispersion, which is just a measure of how well that smoke is going to move out of the area and become diffuse. If both of those are low, they're going to ban burning that day. Or if there's already a lot of PM 2.5 from the day before, you're not going to be able to do any forest burns or land clearing burns that day within the cone. It's not going to, your smoke's not going to move out of the area. It's going to linger. And then as the transport winds improve or your smoke dispersion improves, you can burn more and more acreage. So the idea behind this tiered approach was, you could see these properties outlined here. Some of these properties are really large and they have, a burn crew behind them. But we also have a lot of those private landowners. Remember earlier I said about 80% of the land in this area is privately owned. And they manage their land with fire too. So the idea is, on these more marginal burn days, we can let the smaller landowners that maybe have their friend or are part of an organization that comes and helps them burn, they can get their smaller acreages out of the way, so that on the days where it's really great smoke weather for clearing out all the smoke, that the bigger land managers can burn. And also, we wanted to manage kind of just that 30 miles around it. So if you're not directly in that cone where the transport wind's going to move your smoke right over it, you still have additional regulation. I should add, these regulations are in addition to anything else the Georgia Forestry Commission has that day. Like, if there's a drought or anything like that, or a fire weather warning, they will take all that into consideration. But it's a little bit less onerous, but there's still some restrictions on how much you can burn. So the next question is, how well did this perform? Because this was enacted in January 1st of 2025 and ran through the entire calendar year. And so I have some preliminary data, and I say preliminary because the official PM 2.5 data from Q4 is not in yet. So we're using provisional data there. And this figure right here, there's a lot going on, but you will see there's some gray lines. Those gray lines are historic daily running averages per quarter. The EPA calculates per quarter and then averages the quarters together to get a yearly average. So that's mimicking what the EPA does. So there's gray lines are historically what has happened. That dark blue line is what happened in 2025. And the shaded rectangles and the numbers along the bottom, the Q1 average through Q4 averages, those are historic averages. Those are what we observed over the last 10 or 12 years. And so what we can see from the historic averages is that historically, Albany is about 9.2 micrograms per meter cubed every year. So just above the new threshold of 9 micrograms per meter cubed. So we had a little bit of work to do. And in 2025, you could just note, looking at the lines, that everything was actually below the historic quarterly averages, and some were well below the historic quarterly averages. And so we ended up with an average annual estimated, and I should, again, Q4 is provisional, of 8.4 micrograms per meter cubed. So well below the historic average and comfortably below the new 9.0 microgram per meter cubed standard. But I will caution that further investigation is needed. We're not sure if all of this is exactly tied to the pilot project. There was droughts in quarters 3 and 4 that curtailed burning. And we also just want to see if the meteorology was different. Was there something different that year versus the historic years that just made it incredible burn weather for everybody in the region? So that's all ongoing analysis. And of course, another question is, well, did people just burn less? Did the restrictions cause them to not be able to get their burns completed? So I'm going to go through this slide kind of quickly so we have more time for question and answers. But the short answer is no, they actually burned more. So within the 30-mile buffer in 2025 compared to the previous 2 years, they burned 2 to 5,000 more. So about 3,000 more acres than in 2023 and 5,000 than in 2024. And if you look at, if we would have had a cone in 2023 and 2024, which we didn't, but if we would have put a cone there, we could see that whether through permitting being denied or just Albany Quail Project and the Georgia Forestry Commission doing a really great job of spreading awareness to all the local land managers that, hey, we're going to manage our smoke better. We've got this pilot program. Let's stick to it. There were fewer permits and fewer fires that were inside the cone. And most of them were outside the cone, meaning that it's not moving over the town of Albany. And so this is really hinting at a change in burn behavior that's occurring. And so we are very encouraged by this and we're continuing on. I'll talk about changes to the pilot program in a little bit we've made for this year, but of course this is a LANDFIRE office hour. So how is LANDFIRE playing into all of this? Well, this is some ongoing analysis that my lab is doing right now, is how can we show that this pilot project is effective, or maybe we can tweak it. Right now we go out, we have that 30-mile buffer. Maybe we don't need 30 miles. Maybe we need 20, or maybe we need 50. Maybe we don't need a cone that's that big. Maybe we can make it smaller, but you can't do that in real time. I can't go out and control the weather and have it change and see what I want without doing some modeling. And so that's where LANDFIRE comes in. So we're starting this modeling process to test how effective the pilot project is and see if we make adjustments to it, if it would be even better. And so one of the data sets we pulled in, I talked about at the beginning, is this prescribed fire permit database, where we have all the locations of prescribed fire that's occurring in this 30-mile radius in Albany. And then for LANDFIRE, we're pulling in the existing vegetation type layer, or the EVT. What is actually burning? Now, when you pull a permit, you give a general category like silviculture, which means, it's under a forest, or agriculture. But with EVT, we can really get at what, according to the data, is actually burning. And I should put a caveat in here that we are using cropland data layer. If EVT flags it as agriculture, cropland data layer is not a LANDFIRE product, but it will tell us what kind of crop was burning. And one of my favorite LANDFIRE data sets to use that's really crucial in this is the Fuel Characteristic Classification System, or FCCS. So you can get fuel loadings from that. So when I'm trying to run a smoke model, you have to know what the emissions are. And the only way you can know the emissions is if you know the area, you know the fuel loading, which means how much fuel burned, how much fuel was accumulated when this fire came through, and then something called emission factors. So for PM 2.5, it would be how many grams of PM 2.5 are emitted if I burn 1 kilogram of conifer forest fuel type. And what's great about FCCS is that it has different strata of fuels. So as I talked about at the beginning, prescribed fire is just along the surface. You don't see it burning down trees, or what we call crown scorch when you see the wildfires where it gets up into the top of trees. It's staying along the ground. So because FCCS has different strata, I can pick to not include canopy fuels, but to include all the fuels on the ground that go into that fuel loading. So it is more reflective of what is actually burning versus some other fuel loading data sets that just group it all together. Because I'm definitely not burning crowns on the tops of trees. I'm burning ground cover, and I have that kind of control with FCCS. So we haven't started a precise modeling yet. We use something called high split in my lab to do that. But when we're focused right here, the results I'm about to show separate things in and out of the cone. So again, that's just a reminder of what a cone would look like. Um, we can see using EBT what is allowed and what's not allowed. So this is looking at 2023 data with LANDFIRE. We went with 2023 because it had no pilot program going. So 2025 data obviously would have been skewed by the pilot program in place. And so we see that most of the permits are coming for conifer forest, which is no surprise in this region. And then we see that, a lot of in cone not allowed burns according to the 2025 Pilot 2.0 program. Several of these permits would have been denied because they would not have fallen within that pilot. So we're just doing this to kind of get an idea. If we go back and look, how much emissions are we saving, or how many emissions are not passing over the sensor now with these new rules in place? So this is kind of a fun figure. So this is going through every single day during burn season from February 1st to the end of April. And it is looking at if we apply Pilot 2.0 rules to every permit that was pulled, was it allowed to burn under the Pilot 2.0 rules, which would be a circle, or was it going to be denied, which would be an X? And so as it's ticking, it's showing the actual emissions. Now, I should say this is total emissions from the entire fire. This is not necessarily what's hitting the sensor. A lot of the smoke rises up and moves out. But you could see as permits are getting denied by the pilot program, these are the simulated allowed emissions. So these are just the emissions that would have happened under the pilot program. Because some of those burns in the cone especially would have been denied. So we are taking kind of the edge off the amount of emissions that are being emitted. And I will say that one of the things we're working on implementing right now is, in all likelihood, if a permit would have been denied in the cone, they would have burned it another day when it was outside the cone, or the weather would have been permissible to do so. But we haven't had that modeled quite yet. But this is just, do we have everything working? Is LANDFIRE working correctly? Are we getting the correct fuel loadings? Or should we add in another fuel loading category? So this is just kind of an exploratory phase right now, but I thought it was really interesting just to show what we can do with the LANDFIRE data sets. And this is the same, I included this figure. It's showing the same information, just in a static figure. I always like to have a backup in case the animated ones don't work in PowerPoints, as they frequently don't. But this is just showing, as we go through burning season, this is how much emissions are being saved by being denied in the cone. So this is kind of what we like to see. It's taking the edge off the emissions, but it's not stopping burning completely. Because like I said, we're trying to find a balance.